Okay, you guys, welcome back. In this one, we're going to actually cover some JavaScript. So before we do that, just to review, we did a little bit of HTML, just some general basics on what a tag is, how to close the tag, the head, the metadata in there, how to link to CSS, which then covered some of the CSS, again, very broad and general of this CSS. So if you want more descriptions on things, I would suggest first of all the W3 Schools is a good source, or if you just type in learn HTML, go through their tutorials. There's Code Academy right here. Let's open that up for you. So you can log in here. Basically, they have some standards, learn HTML tables. I believe I have a login here, so let's not upgrade to Pro. Okay, cool. So here we are. Let's go to the catalog. HTML and CSS right here. So if you go through this, this will tell you a lot, and then basically you just kind of follow what they want you to do. In the code editor, to the right, type your name between the H1 tags. So here we go, and then press run. Once it's done, once it's correct, you get a check mark. And then you can go to the next one. And now HTML anatomy. Let's see, what do they want us to do here? Study the diagram to the right to learn HTML ... So as we discussed before, a tag, which is the element, content inside of that. Add a body to your page using the body element. Close the body, and we should be able to hit run, and I'm assuming it'll work. Yep. Add the following code between your opening and closing. So we could just copy paste, and I'm not going to go further than this, but as you can see, it will help you get some basics of HTML. And then after this, there should be some CSS coming up, I believe. So, Code Academy, it's free. You can sign up for the Pro accounts if you really want. But beyond that, okay, so let's get into some JavaScript. So, very first thing, we're going to create a new file. We're just going to call it yeah, sure, we'll call it index.js. .js for JavaScript, okay? So in here, this is where we actually do our JavaScript. Now we can do it just like we did CSS, where we can do some internal JavaScript here. Now, typically, you'll see this a lot written as well. And then they'll close the script. And this type is just saying that it is JavaScript. You'll see that's for some internal CSS as well. You don't necessarily need this anymore. It's still my habit to do it, but it should still run just like we did on style without any of that. So you can type it in here, but for our purposes, we are going to actually do it inside of here. So very first thing, we're going to go into some data types. So what is a data type? A data type is basically an element. So the basic elements that you would use in order to create things. So everything builds off of these specific elements. So there's what's called primitives. There's 6 of them in JavaScript. Boolean, null, which means there's absolutely nothing. It's not just a 0. Non-existent, as it says here, or invalid. From there we have undefined, which as we look, so this is a value that's automatically assigned to variables that have been declared, or to formal arguments which are there, which there are no actual arguments. So there are cases of undefined as well. There is a difference between null and undefined. Undefined just means it exists, but there's nothing defined about it, and null means it doesn't exist at all. Then you have a number, a string. Now a string is made up of a bunch of characters, a sequence of characters used to represent text. So when you hear someone say string, they're actually talking about literal text, just like you would write on a piece of paper. From there we also have a symbol, which is new for ECMAScript 6. Class-like function called symbol. The data type symbol is a primitive data type having the quality that values this type can be used to make object properties that are anonymous. Haven't really done too much of this, so it is a little bit newer, but there is the symbol value. If you want to look into it, there's a lot more here about it. And then the very last data type is an object. And an object can be thought of exactly like you would in the real world. If you had a sandwich, that would be an object, or a baseball, a glove, anything like that would be an object. And in programming, an object represents typically a bunch of these other primitive types in a collection. So there we have it. There's all of those. An object is a value in memory which is possibly referenced by an identifier. So a collection of properties. That's exactly what it says here. So what does that mean for us? Well, before we go too further, actually let's do this first. So if we have this, and JavaScript's a little bit different, you can get it to display inside of your HTML, but typically JavaScript is a way to compile or process things on a browser side. So it's not using any type of backend, it's using your computer's browser, this little object right here, and uses that to process things so that you can get some real-time information and changes to a page dynamically. So what that means is we're not going to display it like typical HTML. So when we were last here, we were inside of our tutorials, and when we did this, we saw it here. Now, if we're going to go to this JavaScript file, we're not really going to see much. So what we're going to do is actually open our console. Now, to do this on a Windows computer, or believe the Macs as well, I don't do too much with Mac, it works on Linux, is just to press F12. And that's going to open up all of these here. What we want is this console, and the reason why we want this console is because then we can say in here console, which is that console that we just opened, .log, and we're going to log something to the console. Now, we're going to use a string first. In order to do that, we use parentheses. It doesn't, not parentheses, I'm sorry. Parentheses are these. We do use parentheses here, but we use quotation marks, and inside of these quotation marks we type whatever we want. So this would be defined as a string. Anything inside of these quotation marks is a string. You can also use the single quotation. You can use the back, and all of these work. You start with one and you end with one. Now what would happen if I didn't have this? If I didn't have this, well, right here, let's look at that. If I didn't have this, this would just run on forever. And our compiler, Atom itself doesn't like it. It would close right there. And this would literally be everything inside of it. It's yelling at us because that's a mistake, right? If we did this, it wants us to still close this string. So we've now closed the string. And then if we run this again, we get it there. That should not have happened. So let's JavaScript print to console. Let's go back to W3 schools. Let's do it this way. This way works. Oh, apologize. I didn't click on what I wanted. Now, here we go. What we're going to do is actually copy a little bit of this. Let's just do it there. So we're going to say script, close the script. Now we're going to use a little bit of JavaScript. Doesn't matter what we're doing at this point. I'll explain that in a little bit. And we are going to now, if you remember this list item that we did before, li for list item, we're going to give it an ID. So we say ID equals, and then we give it a string literal for the ID's name. And we are going to call this, we'll just call it test. Now we don't have anything inside of here, but now that I have this, I can get that element by the ID, right? So we're going to get it by test. And then we're going to say dot enter HTML equals A. Now we haven't defined A yet. So if I do this and we run it, we might actually get an error. Uncaught reference. A is not defined. So this is a good thing to have open when you're programming, especially for JavaScript. You can typically see HTML errors as they come up here, but for JavaScript, you're going to want the console open a lot of times. So, A is not defined. So A is undefined. It's not null, it's just undefined. Now if we do this before it though, console.log A, Now let's see what we get. Same thing, right? It's because I didn't save it. And still the same thing. So, why is A undefined? Well, we haven't declared it, have we? So we'd want to say var A. Now we use var in JavaScript, the new ECMAScript 6. You can actually do a few different ones. Let is another, but we're going to stick with var for now. Var stands for variable. And then we say which variable. We're going to call it A. And we need it to equal something, right? Well, what happens if we don't? Cannot set property inner HTML of null. Well, let's look at that, right? That means that this getElement by ID test doesn't exist, does it? No, I did not plan this out before. I'm just going with the flow of what our errors come up as. That way you can see a little bit of the process of what happens too. So, why does it say this doesn't exist? Well, as I configure, it might be just the item itself. Or we might even have another problem. Now you can declare JavaScript wherever you want. There you go. And so we see what the problem was, okay? Let's look at this. When we had it up here, well, let's look at what happens. If you're just reading this, you would do this. You would read it. Okay, doc type, HTML. Good, got that. We got HTML. We got a head, okay. Oh, our first item we really have to care about. This is our title, which again goes up here. Our link to the CSS. Okay, cool. We have a link to something and we can say, oh, it's here style.css. Well, that's right here. Okay, cool. We could look into there if we want, and what would happen is it would look into here and it links it all together. And then we come down to this script and we say, okay, we have a script, a var A. Okay, cool. It hasn't been defined, but it's there. Now document.getElement by ID test. Wait, we haven't ran into that yet, have we? Well, no, we haven't ran into that yet. So why would we have inner HTML of something that doesn't exist? So this is reading it from top to bottom. And then if we keep going down, head, body, okay. But what happens is we've already gotten this error. Now, HTML is smart enough. It's going to display all the HTML. And it's going to throw this error, but it's not going to stop you from seeing your web page. It's not just going to display as nothing. So that's a nice thing, but also it can be a little bit of a bad thing because then you don't know if it's working or not, do you? That's why we have the console. So, again, if we take this, we put it down here, and then we read it again, title, we have the link to the CSS, okay, we get to the body, H1, 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 paragraph with an ID of test, okay, cool. My first paragraph, second paragraph, okay, we have this script here, A, getElement by ID test. Oh yeah, I remember that, it was right here. The inner HTML of it is going to actually equal A. And of course, when we save that and run it, it's undefined. Now, what do we need to do? We need to define it, don't we? So let's give it some text. And just for this case, we're going to get rid of all of these because we don't need them anymore. There we go. Hello world. And of course I have these as well. Forgot to get rid of those. There we go. Hello world. Now what happens if we put some text here? This is just a test. Now what do you think will happen? Well, let's find out for sure. So we refreshed and it displays the exact same thing. The reason why is because, well, we set the inner HTML to A, which in this case is hello world. So this is the inner HTML, so it's inside of this element, the HTML inside of it, and it is being completely overridden by A. So if we got rid of this, we're going to go ahead and comment this out. Now I showed you last time that you can do comments like this. If we want one-line comments, we can just do a double slash. If you hold Control and then your /, you can uncomment or recomment. Really super fast. That's a quick trick for you. And there we go. So if we uncomment it, here we go. So now what happens? Let's say we have after here var b equals, we change the text again. Now we haven't set it to anything, so let's go ahead and set it to the same element, since that's the one we're working with. Now, what do you think will happen? Will it display hello world? We change the text again. Both. Well, let's go ahead, refresh it. Here we go. And if you notice, when we loaded this page, we never saw hello world, did we? Nor did we see this is just a test. The reason why is it processes everything and then displays it. So this is getting overridden faster than we can see it. It's happening in a matter of a millisecond. So all we're going to see is this one. So that's a string. We've now used a string. Let's go ahead and get rid of this. And let's change it. So let's use a number. Let's use 5. Now what happens if we do, well, before we do that, let's go ahead and change this back. A, and then exact same as math, we're going to say plus B. What do you think will happen? Will we see one? Will we see both? Will we see, A, B, both of them? Let's find out. So we refresh. Look at that. We see both of them. The reason why is this is called concatenation. So basically with concatenation, we literally add them together. Just like you would with numbers, you're adding them together. However, with a string or with a text, it's actually literally those characters. So you're adding characters on top of characters. It's not going to just change it to something completely random. It's not like it can do H plus W or hello world evaluates to 63 plus like 50. It doesn't do that. It's going to keep it as a string, and then we add the next string right after it. So if we change this, we should see we change the text again, hello world, right? So there we go. That's basic concatenation. From here, let's go ahead and let's change the variables. So let's go back over here, data types, scroll back up a ways. So we've now used a string. We know what undefined is. Well, do we know what undefined is? Let's go ahead and look at that just a little bit more. What if we just do this? B plus A. What do you think will happen? Will we see on here undefined hello world? Will we just see hello world? What do you think will happen? Well, we do see undefined hello world. The reason why this undefined evaluates now that we're adding it together into a string. And the reason this happens is JavaScript is what's called loosely typed. So when we declare a var, and a lot of other languages, you need to declare that it's an int. You need an int for integer. You need to declare that it's a string for a string. And what you'd have to do is cast it or implicitly tell the program that you need to change its type. In JavaScript, sometimes we do have to do this, but a lot of times these will be done for us. So now let's do this, for example. We're going to have 6. So is this going to show 6 hello world? Well, from our last example, it probably will, right? Yep, it does. And there we have it. Now, that's basic addition, but with math, we can also times, right? Now this, I'll just tell you right now, does not work with strings. If we change this to a string and tried this, we get NaN. This stands for not a number. The reason why is this times symbol implicitly converts and wants it all to be a number. So we can't do that. Well, can we do this? What do you think? There we go. Absolutely the same thing. The reason why is because that's a string. It doesn't have a number. So a number times a string is definitely not a number, right? So what we can do is our basic math here. 6 times 4, 24. Now, same as most math, we have the order of operations. So this will end up the exact same. Well, let's move on then. So that's a number. You can also, for example, have like 4.23. Let's go ahead and save it and run it. So it's gonna print it out with the decimal place, as you would expect, right? Because in normal math, 4.23 times 6 is 25.38. So there we have that. So it doesn't necessarily matter on the numbers. It's literally just as it says, a numeric data type in the double precision 64-bit floating point format. And if you want to learn more about what exactly that is, you can go ahead, come here and click on this. And like I said earlier, in other programming languages, different numeric types can exist. For example, integers, floats, doubles, or binums, big nums, or big numbers. So there we have that. But let's go back. We've done string, we know about undefined, number. Let's go ahead. What about Boolean? Well, a Boolean, let's look at this first. Logical data type that can only have values of true or false. So if we want to say something is true, it would be a Boolean, or false is a Boolean. We use these a lot in if statements, as it shows here. So if a condition is true or if a condition is false, do something. So let's go back over here. True. Let's put this one as false. Well, true times false. What do you think will happen? Let's refresh. We get 0. Why do we get 0? Well, let's look at a Boolean a little bit closer. This does not tell us all about Booleans. So let's open a new page. JavaScript Boolean. We're not finding it, so I'll just tell you without this. A Boolean is anything that or can evaluate to a number. So in the case of false, this Boolean, there's our comments again, would be 0. In the case of true, this evaluates to a 1. Well, what's 1 times 0? Here's your answer right there. So that's 1 times 0. It evaluates to a number when you're doing some math. However, let's do this. Let's just do one of them. It comes back to true. The reason why is because it is true. It's going to show it's a Boolean and it displays as true. And if we switched it to B, it would show false. Now you don't have to do this. You don't have to declare variables. You could literally just do right here and say true times false. If you wanted, you could do true times 594, and let's see what we get. 594. Why? Because true, if you remember, is 1. 1 times 594 is 594. So there's our Booleans for us. We'll get a little bit more in depth in those coming up, but usually, as it showed, you'll use a Boolean for a conditional statement. So if true, so when we do an if statement, the only time this code can run is if the conditional is true. So if this case is true, whatever happens in here, or if the Boolean in here is true, we get true. Now you can also set this, for example, if we needed to do something like 10 is greater than 9. Well, what do you think will happen? A should still come up to true, shouldn't it? Let's go ahead and find out. Okay. We still get true. We don't get 10 greater than 9. We get true. And if it's greater than 11, we get false. So there's Booleans in a nutshell. If you need more information, Go ahead and JavaScript data types is a good Google search for you. Then here's W3 Schools. We got Mozilla. You'll basically find a lot of information if you need. And again, just like before on the Code Academy, if we went into the catalog, there's JavaScript right here. Here's the introduction to JavaScript. And when you start it, it'll tell you a little bit about stuff. And then it'll want you to log, console.log, your age. So there's that. Now I was a little curious. There we go. Console.log does work. I don't know why it wasn't working on the index.js though. That is something I'll find out, but I don't want to cover it necessarily for these purposes. So here's that. For now, it's okay that we're just setting it into inner HTML. So where are we? We need to go back a little bit. Boolean null is a specific case. Remember, a point that doesn't exist. So if we got rid of both these lines of code, we might still get undefined, but the reason why we're getting undefined is it doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and compare it. Now, normally if you notice, we've been using one equal sign. For a comparison operator, so that's to say, we want to say if A equals B, for example, we would use a double equal or a triple equal. Triple equal is a little bit stricter of an equal than the double equal. In our cases, we're okay with just using that. So A is null. Let's go ahead and, just like you would in math, just to be safe on what we're doing, we'll go ahead and put it in parentheses. Order of operations means anything in parentheses gets compared together or evaluated together, right? So here we go. A is not defined. Well, we get the same thing. Why? Is because, well, it's not defined. How's it supposed to compare it? It just can't. So if we actually uncommented this line of code, came up here, we'd get true because A is undefined. We haven't defined it. We've declared it, but we haven't defined it. So null's a little bit special of a case. It's a little bit harder to show it in a basic example like this, but just do know that it exists and it's different than undefined for now. So the last thing, string, is an object. So let's go ahead and go to an object. Now there's a lot of different types of objects out there, and this gets us into what's called object-oriented programming, or OOP. So from here, an object, if you remember, data structure containing data and instruction for working with the data. Yeah. So in this case, there are some predefined objects out there. Let's go ahead and objects. Working with objects at newsphere.com. So has a JavaScript object, if you remember, it has properties on it. Okay, and you can access those properties with a simple notation which uses a period. So we have the object name, dot or period, and then the property name. So same down here, my car. This is the object itself, and then there's a property called make inside of that object, and we set that property to equal Ford as a string, right? The model is another property in there. We set it to be Mustang, and then year is another property as a number, and that is going to be 1969. So that's one type of object. It has properties. There's also an array where we can, let's not get into arrays for now, but just know that an object is an item that has properties. So now we're going to go back over and open up our paint. The reason why we're doing paint, and forgive my drawing, I'm terrible at this, but for our purposes, let's go ahead, we can use black. Let's say we have a dog. Has some eyes, and this is our dog with the nose right there. Now, if we have a dog, how do we know about this dog? Well, the dog has specific traits, right? It has, for example, and sorry, my mouse just disappeared. There it is. So we have an ear, right? But not just one ear, we actually have two ears. So that's a property, and this ear itself could actually be an object, right? Because an ear is an object. And so we actually have a dog, which is one object, which has a collection of other objects in it, right? So ear being one object, eye being another object, but there's two of them, so there's two objects there. Nose, and then of course a mouth. It could have spots, have spots on one ear, but this is still part of an ear, right? Well, the reason why we're going over this actually helps us a lot in programming. So let's go ahead and clear everything we did here. Let's say we have a website. Well, on our website, we want to have a user, right? Well, what's a user? A user is a person. And then what's this person need? Well, a person has specific things. In the case of our website, we don't care about everything, but we do want a user has a name. A user can have an age, a gender. A user can have ethnicity, and it can have tons of different things, right? Well, some of these, if you look at these are just our primitive variables, aren't they? Well, name, that's a string. Age is a number. Gender is a string. You can also create gender as a Boolean or a number if you really wanted. But in general, you would say it's a string. Ethnicity is a string. And let's say on your website you have a shopping cart, right? Because usually we want to create something that has, we want to be able to buy something on our website. So let's go back, and we have this little shopping cart. So on our shopping cart, we want to say a user, of course, has a shopping cart. Okay, not too bad. A user has a shopping cart. It's going to be one of our little properties down here. However, if you look at this, a shopping cart is an object, isn't it? Okay, well, a shopping cart can have, usually we want to identify it with a unique ID. We want to have items in it. It can have a total property, so we know the total of it. And basically that's generally what a shopping cart's going to have, right? It's going to have an ID, so we know whose shopping cart it is. We're going to have items and a total price. Well, okay, that's easy enough, right? If we look at this, an ID, that can just be a number. A total is just a number, isn't it? I mean, any type of currency is a number with some type of currency symbol attached to it. That's how we define it as a currency or a monetary value. And then we have items. Now notice this items is plural. Well, why? Because items as well is its own object. So now let's go ahead, get more text. And here we have items, or in this case a single item, right? Because it's a collection of items. Well, an item's going to have a name. An item's going to have a price or a value. Let's go ahead and name it price. And maybe a description. It might have a quantity. This quantity you'd usually want to actually attach to the items over here so that each item has its own quantity. Let's not get too much into that, but just so you know, this quantity, even though you'll have an amount of items, it actually does not go here. A quantity would go here. Quantity of item, right? And that would be an array with this, and we'd actually use a little bit different of an array. We'd actually have them attached together inside of their own array. We're not going into some big detail or specifics in this case on this. I just wanted to give you a simple example of what would happen and why we need to know about objects. So here we have it. You have a user. A user has a shopping cart as a different, and then we have an item or multiple items inside of that shopping cart. So what if we just, put it all together? Because we can, right? We could have this user. The user has a name, gender, ethnicity, age, has a shopping cart, has items, quantity of each item. We have an item description. We have item price. We have item name and various other things, right? Well, let's look at this. If we look at this in real life, does a user actually have items? Okay, yeah, you could say that a human being has items. If they're at home, a computer is an item, so they could have their computer, they can have a musical instrument, they can have the baseball. These are all different items that they could have. Yeah, okay, so we could see items here, but this is actually items for a shopping cart. Okay. And then quantity of each item. You could reasonably say that everything kind of goes in here, right? Well, the problem with this is that's not really how the real world works. If you look at the real world, you go shopping at Walmart. Well, okay, you're going to be there. You're going to get a shopping cart, right? You go, you get a shopping cart from Walmart. It's actually Walmart's shopping cart. It's not yours. You just use their shopping cart. Well, we have an ID because it's your shopping cart at that point. So you can already specify, okay, this is mine. There's some way to identify that's your shopping cart. Well, inside of a shopping cart, you throw your items, milk, eggs, bread, butter, such like that. Those are contained inside of a shopping cart, right? Imagine going to Walmart and just grabbing everything with your hands and just carrying it in your arms all around and trying to grab more things. It doesn't really work so well, right? You can do it for a few items, but not for tons of items. And that same problem comes if we tried to do this. If we tried to have everything here, okay, yeah, it could work for a few items, but the more items you have, the more difficult it becomes, right? Yep, definitely. So, a shopping cart itself, same thing. We could put this item name, the item price, item description in here, but then we need item 1 description, item 2, item 3, item 4, item 5, so on and so on, and it just becomes a lot over here. So again, like a shopping cart will have items in it, but does the shopping cart really care about an item's name? Does it really care about an item's price? No, not really. You don't really need to know those things until you go and you check out at the front. And then the checkout actually is what totals up that price. In the case of the shopping cart, we would have this have a total as well, a running total, same thing as if you had it in your head. So as you can see, this can become much easier, much more lifelike than doing something like this. This is how code used to be. And then along came object-oriented programming. An object has specific things in it. And the better you become at identifying where a property should fit, the cleaner your code will be and the easier it is to actually write your code properly. Not only for you to read it and mess with it later, but for someone else. If they need to look at your code, change it, read it, do whatever they need to do with your code, it becomes much easier. Not only that, but there's one more reason for this. So let's go ahead and open a new one. So here we are programming along. Here we are. We're, happy, we're smiling, and we're just programming. Okay, cool. One person, easy enough, we can do everything as we need it, right? Well, here comes person B. Here's your aunt, your uncle, your niece, nephew, boss, whoever it is, girlfriend, boyfriend. Person B is like, hey, I want to help you out. Okay. Well, you have one project, right? All you have is one project. And inside of this project, same thing in a shopping cart. If you put everything together in one huge thing, well, there's only one file to work on, right? How are they supposed to help you out without ruining your code? It doesn't seem very likely, right? Because you're going to write something on line 5 and they're going to write something on line 5, and it just becomes a little bit of a nightmare. Well, in comes object-oriented programming, and you go, okay, well, I'm creating 3 of these. You say I have a user, shopping cart, and of course item, in this case singular item, because we have multiple of them in the shopping cart. That's where our items would be. And you say, okay, well, I'm gonna work on this user. Does this user really require to know about this shopping cart? Does it need to know about really anything over here? Well, it really doesn't. You can grab a shopping cart, but like if you're not at Walmart, why do you care about a shopping cart, right? If you're not at the grocery store, you don't need a shopping cart. Why would you have a shopping cart? So here you are, you're like, okay, well, I'm gonna make this user, and if you'd like, you can help me by creating this shopping cart for me. Now this shopping cart, if you remember the definition from before, it's gonna create its functions. I did not want to do that one. It's gonna create its functions. And by functions, I mean literally things that make it function, right? It's going to create its variables. It's going to create processes. We'll just call it processes for now, on how to do things. In this case, like how to get your totals, how to calculate taxes, whatever else it needs to do, right? Okay, cool. And so you can just concentrate on your user. You can get name, gender, all these different variables, and whatever a user needs to do on your site. For example, they may need to change their password, right? They may need to update a credit card. Whatever they need to do, they can do it inside of the user. And then over here, all you have to do is basically pick up a shopping cart, right? And of course you would add items to your cart. So you can do that, but do you care as a user? As this object, you don't need to care what items, right? These can just be items. You don't need to know which items specifically. You don't need to know everything about every item. All you need to know is that an item is going to have a name, and that name is going to be a string of some sort. It's going to have a price, which will be a number, and it will have a description, which will also be a string. Yeah? Are you following along so far on what we're doing here? We don't really care. Remember, we don't care about every single item in the store, right? We only want to find the items we want. So add items to your cart. We're just going to say, okay, well, let's add the item. And this item can now go into our cart. And then when you're ready for it, when you go up to pay, you need to know how much. What's the total cost of my cart, right? Because you care about that if you have it. If you go shopping, I mean, unless you're Bill Gates, I guess, you're gonna care how much money you're spending, right? And even if you're Bill Gates, you don't want to overpay for something. You don't want to buy $5 worth of items and be charged $500. And as the store, they're not going to charge you less money either. So this way, you're going to want to know the cost. Well, how do you get the cost? Again, we can go back. We can add a little bit of text. Get total amount, right? Well, in this case, we break the rules of reality a little bit because we don't have a cashier ringing everything up for us. What we do have, though, is items with their values, and we have basic math that we can use. If you didn't have a cashier, you'd say if we have 3 items at $5 each, that's $15. So we're getting the total amount. So we don't care as the user, do we? All we care about is that this comes back as a what? As a number. And then we don't have to worry about all the math. We don't have to worry about all these complex things that are happening in the shopping cart. All we care about is I have a shopping cart. I can add items into my shopping cart, and I can get the total cost of my shopping cart, which it returns or gives me a number back. So, you don't need to care what their code does. You don't care how they do this. You don't care about this at all. All you care about is that there's a total amount that comes back to you as a number, and that you can tell the cart or you can put items in your cart. Those are the 2 things you care about, is putting items into your cart and the total cost. Now, on the same side, now let's look at our shopping cart. Our shopping cart's the middleman, right? So we have a user. User gets to the shopping cart, and then items also get put in the shopping cart. So the shopping cart actually is what controls everything for us. Does an item Does this item here care about who picks it up? I mean, maybe if it's a puppy, but in the grocery store, do eggs care who picks up the eggs? Who buys them? No, not at all, right? Does the item care which shopping cart it's in? No. It doesn't need to know about that. Your item is basically your bottom layer of this pile. So it doesn't care about anything but itself. It's pretty selfish like that, but in a good way. It really doesn't need to know, so why should it care? It does what it does, and that's all it does. It doesn't need anything but the basic information of an item. At the same time, the shopping cart can get multiple of them, and the shopping cart doesn't need to track every single item, right? It doesn't need to track eggs, milk, bread. It doesn't need to care about how much bread is. It doesn't need to care about how much milk is, how much eggs are. All it cares about is how many it has of an item. And that's how we get totals, right? Well, so all this shopping cart cares about now is this price right here. All it cares about is getting back, we'll draw it down here. All we care about is getting back a cost or a price of item. That's all it really cares about, right? The name, the description, those are feel-good things, and they're important. But in the end, the shopping cart doesn't care about those either. All it really cares about is how much is the item. Well, that's easy enough to do. We say, okay, what's the price of the item? And we know it's returning a number, right? We don't care which item it is. We know that every single item's going to return a number. Which, again, this is the price, is a number. Once we total up all of those prices with this get total amount here, it comes back over here, remember, to the total cost to tell the user the number. So in the end, we get a number, we do the math, we do whatever rules we need to do in the shopping cart, and then we come over here and we tell the user how much. So the shopping cart acts as the cashier and the cart itself in the case of the internet. Hopefully that makes sense. The reason we care about that is then we can do a little bit deeper of programming. Like I said before, you can have two people working on the same program without interfering with each other, without caring about each other's code at all. They can just know that when I call a shopping cart, I can add items to a cart and I can get the cost of the cart. Whoever's working on the items doesn't have to care about the user at all. All it needs to know is I need these variables in there and I need to return my price. I need to be able to give out my price. I need to be able to give out my information without needing to know about the cart, without needing to know about the user. And the shopping cart, again, it's the middleman. It doesn't necessarily care which items, but it needs to know about the items. All it cares about here is that it can get the price and name or description depending how you display your cart, right? But in the end, to get our total amount back to the user, all it cares about from the items is this price. And it doesn't care which item, it knows that the item will return a number. And then once we do that math, it can return the number back to the user. No one has to know really about each other. We can keep things separated as they should be. And then you pick up your random shopping cart, you pick up your items. lots of people can pick up the same items without interfering with each other, right? And that is, in a nutshell, how object-oriented programming should work. That's a basic example, but you will come across this quite a lot, especially if you're making a shopping cart. This is how you would make it, right? So let's go ahead. Don't need to save that. Our example. We are going to do the same thing. We're going to link. Let's look this up. So, HTML link to JavaScript page. See, that's why we look this up. Notice this code, script, and then it says src for source. So, we're going to go ahead and copy that down. Notice it still has a closing tag, but we don't necessarily care about it, do we? We don't need anything inside there. We can just say index.js, which goes to that JavaScript file, right? Now we can get rid of this. Let's go ahead and get rid of everything in there. Go ahead and put this into here. Now, before we had to say script, right? External JavaScript file. Let's go ahead and look at this. Okay, that's how we made that, right? That didn't really help us. External JavaScript. As far as we can tell, we don't need these script tags anymore, do we? Well, no, we should not. Because we've already defined this as JavaScript by that .js. So we have the same thing, we got a console log, get element by ID. We've linked it right here. Oh, we have not linked it. Let's go ahead and, yep, right there, we did link it. We have the script saying the source is the index.js file. So notice I put this back up in the head, but we're still referencing this ID of test, right? So let's see what happens. This is just a test. Why uncaught type error cannot set property inner HTML of null? Well, that's not good, is it? The JavaScript gets compiled before anything happens. So let's go ahead and look. Why is my JavaScript running before my HTML? We'll even put a question mark on there. This looks like a good one, right? I'm just beginning to learn JavaScript. I am following the book Simply JavaScript, purchased from SitePoint. I just started the DOM and I'm trying to write code for counting the elements in a web page. The count of the elements is always displayed as 0 even though it's not true. I am writing the code in an external file and linked it to the web page. The code is working fine if I place it as inline in the web page itself. So how should I tell the browser to load HTML first and JavaScript later? Well, okay, that's one way. Put the JavaScript links at the end. Interesting. Let's look at this. Instead of putting your script just above the slash body, you can use the onload method of the window object to run JavaScript code after the window has loaded. This is especially useful if you have images you're swapping or animating. Running JavaScript after onload ensures all images have been loaded. Not all images might have been downloaded when running the JavaScript just above slash body. Right. Okay, so how do we do that, right? Look at this. You can only have one, not multiple JavaScript files. In our purposes it would work, but for later it won't work. This was 2011. Let's see if we can get something a little bit newer. 2015. So here we are. We're going to use an onload event. So for our purposes, typically what's going to happen when you use JavaScript is you're going to call what's called a function or a method. It would be another name for it in different programming languages, but for JavaScript we do call it a function. So we need to first define a function, and then we also need to, as you see right here, W3 Schools onload, we say my function, right? So let's go ahead. We copied that. We go to the body, onload. Let's leave it as called my function. So instead of keeping this out here, let's go ahead and say function and my function. Now to finish creating a function, we need parentheses. We need these curly braces like we've used before in CSS, and then we surround everything and close it. Now let's go ahead. We've defined this as a function. We've said my function. Now these parentheses, they are important. What can happen is we pass parameters in here, okay? So we could actually pass we separate parameters by comma, D, E, F, whatever we want, okay? And so if we actually had two functions, function 2, let's go ahead and finish that off, and let's pass in A. And then let's go ahead and move this over to here. And then from here what we would do is we'd actually just call that function function 2, same parentheses, and we need to make sure that the number of parameters from one to the next match. So there we have it. Now what's going to happen? Well, so far we don't have this defined, right? So hopefully, if everything goes well, we should still see it say true when we print this out. Right now it didn't do anything, did it? We got this error again. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh. Look at that, true, and it printed out undefined. So if we switch this, we say equals hello world. Go ahead and save that. And let's refresh again. It does show false. Why does it show false? Well, if you remember, we passed A over to here, and then we did this comparison, didn't we? Does A equal undefined anymore? No, A equals hello world. So let's just go ahead and get rid of that and set it back to A. Refresh, and there we have it, hello world again, right? So this is the basics of JavaScript, of how we use it. So we define a function, the name of the function, that way that's our identifier, right? We say it is a function, and then the identifier, how we get to that function. And then if we have parameters, they'd be right here. If we don't have parameters, that's fine too. It can just be blank. And then we write our JavaScript inside of this. Now, we didn't move where the file was located, did we? We use this onLoad event. So an event is literally what it sounds like. Something happened. An event occurred. So when an event occurred, in this case, the event was onLoad as the event name. So once the file, or once the body for exactly precisely was loaded, we called this function right here. Now, if we move this now down again over underneath the body, let's see what happens. Well, we get the same result. Why? Because of how fast things process. So even though this is after the body has closed, we still have linked to the script, and it's underneath the body. But once the body actually loads, then we call the event. It's just a matter of how fast things actually happen. But best practice, let's go ahead and keep it up here. And there we have it. That's some basic JavaScript. Not too complicated on the process, if you remember, of how to use this, how we're going to do some object-oriented programming. Next time we're actually going to start building a site, okay? We're going to start by designing the site very first. From there, we're going to get into actually using all of our sources. We're going to introduce how to set up React and how to actually use React for our website. So just next time, let's go ahead and do that. If we need more familiarity with anything that's happening here, again, we'll be learning as we go. But remember, there was the Code Academy. And there's not just Code Academy, there's quite a few different things out there. Learn JavaScript. Code Academy, this learnjs.org. Learn JavaScript.today. There's W3 Schools tutorials, other videos. Free Code Camp is another one. Let's go ahead and search for that one. freecodecamp.org. Start coding. It's free. Let's go ahead and sign in. Accept. Let's go ahead to the coding curriculum. And just like Code Academy, It's going to show us some basics here. It's going to tell us what it wants done. To pass the test on this challenge, change your h1 elements text to say hello world. This one's a little more specific than the last. You run the test. You can reset it if you need. In this case, you can actually get a hint. So that's free code camp for you. Once you're done, you go to the next one. Let's look at our curriculum. Basic HTML, HTML5, some basic CSS, visual design if you want to learn some of that, Flexbox. All of these are mostly, again, this is inside the CSS. Applied accessibility, responsive web design principles, image responsive, retina image, Flexbox, dot 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 dot. That's inside of here, which is inside the 300 hours. And then here's our JavaScript. And if we need to, here's some basic JavaScript. So we can learn how to comment. We can learn how to declare JavaScript variables, add two numbers, declare string variables, anything we need to know. We can learn the basics right here. Hey look, a shopping list. Create a shopping list in the variable myList. The list should be a multi-dimensional array containing several subarrays. And the first element in each subarray should contain a string with the name of the item. The second element should be a number representing the quantity. So, example, just like this. How do we do that? Well, here's our first array. We just do that. 2, 3, 4, 5 items. It didn't say we couldn't have the same exact items, did it? Run the tests. Do we pass? Oh, look at that. We pass. What if I only had 4? Run the tests. And look at that. Underneath here, you must have at least 5 items in your list. So it doesn't work. We can reset the code, and there you have it. If you need help, you can ask for help, create a post, or you can get a hint. A multi-dimensional array would have the following outline, just like this. Each subarray should be separated by comma. Try to solve the problem now. Don't forget the semicolon. Again, semicolon, very important. There you go, solution ahead. Some code explanation. So if you do need some help, again, freecodecamp.org, Code Academy, both are some good resources to give you some basic practice as well, or just play around on your own. And Google is your best friend. How to write JavaScript. And there you have it. You can get some JavaScript basics, whatever you need to search. You will find an answer. If not, put it in the comments and we'll figure it out together.